Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny,
And I'm Matt.
I'm Seth.
and Matt has gathered us together to talk about magic systems between looks like DCC, D&D, and some other ones.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about magic in general and role-playing games. So the first thing you notice is you're looking around is magic is in most role-playing games, not just fantasy, but obviously in horror, and even in science fiction games. I mean, it's dressed up, but even in Star Wars has the Jedi, right? But even in Star Trek, you've got the Vulcan mind meld and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, there are whole games just about magic. Mage the Ascension, for instance. So my first question to you guys is, why? Why is there so much magic? Why do we like it so much? Manny?
I figured it's because we like the idea of breaking our reality. The idea that we can manipulate it to our whims. I mean, who wouldn't want to have like wings to fly and or cast like fireballs at people? I think it's just something about that. It's a fun idea to imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Seth, you're our resident player. What's your view on the other side of the screen?
Well, it gives more options to player characters rather than like if you took out magic in both arcane and divine, what you're left with is pretty. It would be fighter, thief. Yeah, fighter and thief.
Yeah. Well, speaking
and
of magic,
some smart guy with a book who stands in the back and knows stuff.
Guy, okay, smart guy in the book. Yeah, yeah. So that's so
which nothing wrong with that. You can have a game, but to a lot of people that would be not their cup of tea. It would be kind of boring. But
all right. So just following up on that, why don't we talk about low or high magic systems or games? And here I'm talking about the abundance of magic, right? A low magic game is magic's really hard to come by. Magic items are hard to come by. High magic game is obviously quite the reverse. There's lots of magic all over the place. In a fantasy setting, let's talk about fantasy games. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of high or low magic? Seth, you've played in both.
Well, a typical low magic system would be like Conan. Conan is it's called high fantasy, high swords and sorcery, but magic was always this otherworldly, dark, corrupted type thing. You didn't really see magic much. Conan ran into it, but of course he distrusted magic. And I think one of his companions was a wizard, but a different definition of a wizard we would think now, no pointy hat or anything like that. So it does give you more of an otherworldly aspect. Deep Dungeon Crawl Classics definitely puts this forward. Magic always carries the risk of corruption, of turning you into the other. So that would be sort of Conan would be sort of a low magic system.
Sure.
High magic system would probably be something like the Forgotten Realms, where you can't throw a rock without hitting some sort of magical thing.
It's probably a magical rock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's probably a magical rock. You're right. Yeah. Where also the gods themselves have much more of an influence in day-to-day life or in the actual playable world. In Conan, the Conan stories did refer to gods, but they were like far away, and you didn't really have much. They didn't really have much, except in one or two instances, much direct impact.
So personally, which one do you like? You've played in both.
I prefer high magic, just because I find it more interesting. Although I think an instance of a low magic system done right would be a setting like Conan, where magic is there, and but it has this air of mystery around it.
Right. Um, yeah. I like running low magic systems, as you've suffered through several times. But one of the reasons I like doing that is because it makes magic special. Um, as you've personally experienced, your character once cowed and converted an entire village by casting a spell because they'd never seen that before, and it was really amazing. Magic was special again. Um, yeah, the downside is that you don't come across it as much, so it's kind of a balancing act. It depends on what you like. What about you, Manny? What's your take? High or low?
Oof, that's a tricky one because I like both a lot.
Yeah.
It all depends what story you want to tell. Um, with low magic, when I construct a story around that, it's usually because um, there's a religious question going on.
Mm,
I mean, in the old days, magic was a way of explaining a lot of what's going on in their belief systems. Why where's there a thunderstorm? Is Zeus angry with us? Um, Stories like that. So with a low magic system, if I want to make a game that's much more, I feel like more brutal. Because what's great about Conan is that not only is there's very few people use magic in that world, and usually people that do are are
Mm.
usually evil
Yeah,
the
characters.
yeah,
villains use magic.
yeah.
You know, but also like Crom. Like Crom is mentioned all the time, but Crom never really makes appearances,
Mm.
Right,
or he
right,
really answers his prayers.
right.
Um, that makes sense. That's to me the balance of the world. If magic is rare and dangerous, then the gods either are rare or tough to understand as well. All depends on the world building.
Sure.
High magic is a lot of fun with the right players. Um, like again, like D&D, most of D&D settings are, I mean, I was gonna say Starjammer, but I always confuse that with the Marvel Comics name.
Ace Jam,
Eh,
Spelljammer.
yeah,
Now you got me
Spelljammer.
doing it. Spelljammer. I love Spelljammer. Yes, you're right. High magic. Yeah,
Yeah, it's great. Like it's not just, I mean, it's like high, like super high, like breaking the ceiling high of magic, and it's great. I love that stuff too. Um, Again, it really depends on the player and what story you want to tell,
sure.
and you should really be careful and balance that because it could really, if you have a low magic setting, but you forgot that you let like a magic wand in there that does certain effects, that could really mess up the balance of your game.
Sure. No, definitely, definitely. So Spelljammer is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up because um, that's a high magic setting, and yet magic is still special. Um, and I think they did something really neat there because one of the problems with high magic is when magic becomes so ubiquitous and reliable that it's basically just technology. And we've all seen, there's obviously the jokes to be made there. There's Terry Pratchett, where magic is technology. And in Spelljammer, sure, yeah, magic is kind of technology, that they fly the ships with and everything. And yet, the setting is so gonzo and crazy and weird that everything still seems wondrous. So that's the trick. If you're gonna do a high magic world, how do you do a high magic world and still have magic be something special?
Well, that's a good question. For me, it depends on. I think you have to be really creative with spells. So this is my problem with magic users and like especially the old D&D systems. It or even like other games like Rollmaster, they tend to be pretty boring really fast. It's like for example for Middle Earth when Rollmaster or ICE, um, not Rollmaster, ICE owned Rollmaster and Middle Earth at the time,
Right.
was producing the books, and I had one magic user and all I cast was sleep. That's all I did, sleep, 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 and I just got bored with the character really fast. in the old D&D systems, you may have like one spell in the beginning,
Yeah.
and that maybe like that for like a couple of sessions. And to me, that's just like okay, I just didn't. It just to me it just bored me. That's why in my campaigns back when I was younger, we would like start off like maybe fifth level or third level or at the very least, so that you have some more spells, more hit points too, but more spells. That way, magic users can be more creative.
Yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying, and we did something similar. I mean, not we get tired of seeing the same spells, so the DM started giving players their spells at first level instead of letting them choose spells, and it was great. Suddenly, we were seeing all sorts of spells we never bothered to look for because oh, it's first level. Okay, I'm going to take magic missile and light and sleep, and everybody's taking the same spell. So he finally put his foot down and said, "Oh God, no more magic missile." Or else you don't start with it. You can find it later if you want to, but I'm tired of everybody casting the same spell over and over again.
I've never been in a long-lived D&D campaign. So my experience with first level characters is always in a con setting. And I absolutely hate it. Playing a first level mage. Because basically, like Emmanuel was saying, you get one spell a day, and then you're just the peasant with a pointy hat and a knife. I mean, you don't have many options. I mean, some get around that by giving them one-off spells. I mean, one-off scrolls. Okay. But like you were saying, Matt, you have to get creative.
Yeah. So I really like low-level magic users myself, but it really depends on the DM. You need a DM who is going to be flexible and let you do stuff. Because a magic user isn't just a guy who casts spells, right? There's someone who knows a lot about ancient languages and things like that. They're the
esoteric knowledge.
They're the party's smart guy. So when you're going through the dungeon and you find a strange inscription on the wall, magic user comes forward and he reads it. So even if he can't cast any spells, he recognizes the magical devices, or he can read the languages, or maybe he can recognize the spell that the other guys, the villain's casting. All of this kind of goes a little bit beyond the rules as written in some editions. So you need a GM who's a little bit flexible. And it also gets a little harder in some of the older and some of the newer editions because they started codifying all that. Right. Instead of, so if you see a strange inscription on the wall, right, you say, "Oh, magic user, what does it say?" And the magic user comes forward and says, "I read it what it says." And the DM says, "No, wait, hold on. Do you have that proficiency? Do you have that feat? Do you have that skill? Is it written down?" And you're like, "Oh, no, I didn't take that in character creation. Whoops, sorry, never mind. You don't know what it says." Whereas, in basic, the DM would say, "Oh, yeah, you're a magic user. You know these sort of things." He might call for an intelligence check, or he might just let you say it. He might just give it to you. He says, "You're the smart guy who knows things. You can read it. This is what it says." Also, I like to think of a magic user as knowing all sorts of other little things, like maybe some alchemy or something. So maybe they have little flashbangs or powder, bags of colored smoke that they can throw up at people. And when you meet a low-level monster or a peasant or a city guard, they don't know your first level. They don't know you've only got one spell. They know that you're an old guy with a funny-looking hat, and you're wearing a necklace full of bones, and you've got a crazy-looking wand, and you throw some black powder at them, and then you start saying some bad Latin. If I was a DM, I would let you try to bluff the guard. You know, maybe your wizard could have a good charisma and kind of maybe he knows a lot of card tricks. I mean, there's so many more things you can do besides just cast your one spell.
Hmm.
You know, but yeah, it can get tricky. I think, and I think it's pretty well known that Gary Gygax did not like magic users,
Hmm.
and other people at DSR had to kind of fight for them.
Hmm.
I remember just recently I heard Tim Cast talking about how he had to convince Gary to let magic missile always do the damage automatically, because Gary wanted you to have to roll forward or something like that, and Tim said, "Oh, please let him just have something, let him have this one spell," and he talked him into it. So, and of course, the game's completely changed in the later editions. I mean, it just seems like everybody has magic everywhere, regardless of class. And
Yeah.
maybe they don't call it magic, but they've got magic. And then, I mean, it's a little better now. In fourth edition, everybody literally did have magic.
Hmm.
But I forgot where we were. We were talking about
Well,
low level, high magic.
well, definitely it started creeping a little bit third edition, and then definitely fourth and fifth. You started seeing more magic coming in.
Yeah, yeah.
Fourth edition was weird because what they
Everybody
called
had
it,
powers. You slotted
yes,
in powers. Yeah.
yeah. So it wasn't like particularly magic. It was just power. It's almost like I always compare it to Final Fantasy Tactics. And if you never played it, then it sounds what I'm saying just sounds gibberish. But
I'm
think
sure
of it as
someone's
like
played it.
Well, they were trying to tap into the online community, like you were
yeah.
saying. In Final Fantasy Tactics, World of Warcraft, where all your powers are just buttons. Yeah.
Yeah, it was more like yeah, it was definitely like a more closer to a board game variation of
Mm.
D&D than anything.
Mm.
Fifth edition, yeah, I mean fifth edition has cantrips, which I think was introduced in third or fourth edition. I don't remember which one, but we have cantrips, and I don't mind cantrips so much because again, it gives magic users more things to do. But I feel like it created another problem where they keep using spells, the same spells all the time. And I don't know. I when I grew up watching like magic stuff on TV and movies, there's always this like contest of wills where you're fighting against nature or fighting against another magic user. And
Mm.
it's always about it. So the way I envision what a magic user casting spells is that you're using a great amount of internal energy to 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 create your own form of reality into place.
Sure,
You know,
sure.
you're trying to make fire appear out of nowhere, so you're using your abilities to break the laws of physics to create some sort of fire spell. Um, so I feel that the problem with cantrips, in my opinion, is that I wish there was like a not a limit, but like after a certain point, you have to roll like a Constitution save or Intelligence save so that you can keep casting. Because after a while, it's gonna drain you, and I
Sure.
think that's my biggest beef. It having magic everywhere, it's a little weird. It's something I'm still not used to in fifth edition, but I just the I wish cantrips were uh, less utility spells and more like create some sort of different creative role playing outlet.
Hmm.
Well, in OSE, Old School Essentials, it specifically says for clerics and magic users, they have a paragraph that says they can make their own spells. They can research stuff. Nobody really does that though. I mean, even D&D had rules for it. You'd have to search to find them, but they
It,
could do magical research. It'd take a hell of a long time, but nobody really did it. So
it,
I think it was meant for people to come up with their own spells, but nobody really did it.
it's just
So, go ahead.
because I think it's because most players tend to make broken spells, and dungeon masters don't know how to handle that sometimes, or how to like, all right, I want to create a spell where um, all the horses around me become Pegasi. Um, what kind of level spell is that? What are the components would you need to create something like that? I think that's when dungeon masters have a tough time putting that together. I think that's why um, a lot of people have a hard time making new spells and having that accepted by dungeon masters in their
Sure.
campaigns.
Yeah. Two things. So you could definitely research spells and magical items to make yourself in second edition, because I had a high level magic user who did that.
Yes, I remember you saying that.
And both of them were very difficult, requiring big long quests, which were which were very interesting. And you got to work with the DM there. And the second thing was, basic D&D and very early D&D, particularly basic, was more of a toolkit. They really, so in 1981 and in the 70s and 80s there was no internet. And the only way that, gamers on the East Coast and the West Coast could communicate, as a group, well, they had magazines and things. They had a Dungeon magazine, and but a lot of local groups did their own thing, and they put out their own magazines and books and things. And so I think when they were writing the game, they expected individual groups to fill things in. And a lot of two classes were really example classes. Like the druid was an example of a specialty priest. So, they said, okay, here's a cleric, but then they said, you can make other kinds of clerics based around other gods. And like this one, here's a sample, here's a druid, go make your own. And the same thing with the magic user. They said, okay, so here's the regular magic user, but you can make your own types of magic users, specialty magic users who do certain things. And here's an example. Here's an illusionist. It's like that. Now go make your own. And I don't know how much little gaming groups actually did that by themselves in the 80s, for instance. But for whatever reason, the vast number of players just didn't do that. They just took what was written, which is not a knock on anybody, but advanced Dungeons and Dragons, first and second and then third, it just became more and more codified. So instead of making it kind of discouraged homebrew. So instead of making their own magic user, people would pour through books looking for magic users. It's okay, give us some more magic users, some more specialty magic users, a summoner, write a summoner for us.
One of the interesting things, back on what you were saying, Manny, I remember in the Dark Sun, I've never actually I played Dark Sun a little bit, but not too much, just like one session.
Crazy.
There were two types of specific magic users. One was called a Defiler, one was called a Preserver. Yeah. Now, the Defiler had a lot more powerful spells, but he sucked the life out of everything around him.
Not very popular in a group.
No. And a Preserver was always walking this fine line of not taking more than he should from everything around him and trying to preserve, the balance or life or whatever.
Yeah, Dark Sun was an incredibly well written and thought out setting. It certainly wasn't everybody's taste, but it was really well thought out with the dragon sorcerers and the psionics and the cannibal halflings and the two types of magic.
And the Dree Creams. Don't forget about the Dree Creams.
Oh, yes.
Wait, something you said before about making your own class. Again, the same problem. I've actually had players make their own class a few times, and it's always end up being a disaster because it's always overpowered nonsense.
Yeah.
I had one player. Shout out to Nell if he's watching this. Who actually probably was one of the best players I had, where he instead of making something up, he would, well, Palladium, for example. What was great about Palladium is that a lot of their books you can mix and match certain things. So he would be really creative and say, okay, how about if I have something that was in Rifts, but a variation of that in Palladium and in Palladium fantasy setting, and we would talk about it and create it, and that worked well. But that was because there was sort of like rules. They were
Yeah,
sort of bendable. You could bend the rules to make that
yeah,
work, but D&D, I couldn't do that with D&D. If um, they end up becoming way too powerful.
yeah, yeah. No, that it's definitely definitely a balancing act. But to bring this back to magic,
Yes.
that's all right. So there's a couple other distinctions between magic. There's hard and soft magic, but most um, role playing games are hard magic. Hard magic being magic that is codified and has limits, and you know what to expect. And soft magic being the type of magic you often get in fantasy novels, where they don't tell you what the rules are, and magic can seemingly do anything. I mean, you get the idea that there are rules, but they just haven't bothered to explain them to you. Um, so, you know, I was going to ask you about which one you like, but there's really not much of a choice. Almost all magic in role playing games is hard because just the nature of the beast, right? Magic role playing games are codified; they have to be, otherwise you're just
Well, I think Dungeon Crawl Classics comes the closest to soft. It's soft-ish,
well,
meaning you're not going to get the same effect twice. You're going to get, well, within a certain realm. I mean, you're not going to get
right.
something totally different.
Yeah, but then
But
I was going
go
to say,
on.
but you do have specific spells. I mean, you have
Oh,
a spell,
yes,
and this is
yes.
what it does. And there's certain spells. Soft magic, you
But it can still go wrong and make you grow a third eye.
well, no, that's true. And I was going to mention something like that. I would call that kind of wild magic versus ritual magic.
Yes.
Magic that always does the same thing, or magic that can do all that might go off the rails. But the point is, even in Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you're a wizard, you have a certain number of spells you can cast, and that's it. Like, for instance, we had that guy's castle burned down because we couldn't find any water spells. We're like, how do we put out a fire? I can start fires, but I always stop one. So that's definitely kind of a codified magic system. The games that have a soft magic system would be like a narrative game, where it would say, your magic user can you're a fire mage, and you don't have a list of spells. You kind of describe to me what you want to do, and using the rules of the game, I tell you what you have to roll to make that happen. So you don't have a spell list. You just kind of have you know a vague sort of description. I guess the hardest soft magic would be Mage of the Ascension, right? Where there are rules about how you cast magic, but there are no spell lists. And the whole game is based around, technically, your magic can do anything. So you describe how you're going to do it, and then the system tells you what you can roll and how good you are. But that's soft magic.
And then you have things like totally randomized or wild magic. The only thing you decide is when to actually tear open the veil of reality, and something like a wand of wonder.
Sure.
You don't know what's going to happen. Something.
Yeah.
And so you just pray and hope for the best.
So do you guys like magic that is more codified and ritualistic, in the sense that if I cast this spell, I know exactly what it's going to do? Or do you like, I'm going to unleash the chaos and see what happens? And obviously there's a whole spectrum in between. Manny, do you have any thoughts?
It's gonna sound like a double answer in a sense. If I'm playing with new players, especially, I prefer hard magic. I prefer them to know, so that way they don't get confused. I mean, magic, when someone casts a spell, there's always a variable of some sort. Like, all right, can this spell work in this certain instance? And every instance is very different. So I don't mind it for that. I'm fine with that. But personally, for myself, I like my magic soft. If I was playing a magic user, I wanted to be my spells or my abilities as soft as possible. An
Mm,
example, 7C allows you to have uh, spells, but it's very different. It's categorized by what region of the world you're in. So, like in their version of England, you may have like glamour magic, which is more like the stuff you see in fairies and elves do in myth, um, and it could do storytelling uh, uh, not storytelling powers. I'm not saying it right. It when you cast a spell, you have to kind of like explain and describe what it's doing. For example, so
right.
like if you're there's a certain spell that helps like mend ships, so you have to describe exactly how it's fixing the ship and everything. And that
Mm.
I like a lot better um, than D&D's. Am I the only one that gets annoyed that every edition of D&D has the same list of spells over and over again? You know, I mean, okay, yeah, we want the sleep spells, we want the fireball spells, but I feel like you have to wait until like a bunch of other source books before you get new spells.
Mm.
And Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, one of their newer source books for 5e D&D, finally has a section about like, hey, you could just do little changes here to your spell. So like, if you want to make a blue fireball spell, you could do that, or make a magic missile spell, like make them all spoons instead of missiles. You could
Or
do
Sure.
instead
that.
of fire, having it a water ball instead of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
fireball.
Yeah. Yeah.
But honestly, I've been doing like that for a while. I mean, I've had a lot of really creative players growing up, so a lot of them will look at something like, "Hey, can I just change this and make them more like my style for my
Mm.
character?" And I would say yes, because I
Yeah.
I just don't like. I get really tired of D&D's the way they handle magic.
Mm. Interesting. So, what about you, Seth? Do you like?
I like both. I love random stuff. I
Yeah,
love
I know.
like well the deck of many things, the wand of wonders, where you don't know what's going to happen. You
Yeah.
just hope and pray. Well, it's like what we were saying before about the potions. At the last ditch effort, you just hope for the best and pick a potion. You have no idea what it's going to do. But as far as spells go, if I'm going to cast a spell, I prefer having it actually hard to say what it's going to do. Now, I love the the spells that aren't named conventionally, like not magic missile. I'd love it if the name was so and so's fifth sonata on blah blah blah. It basically does magic missile, but it's not. It harkens back to who made it in a mystical, mysterious thing, rather than saying, "Oh, that's just the run of the mill magic missile."
Sure, sure, and that is an easy thing to do. I
Yeah.
have done that in a lot of my games. I've done that for Seth. Last time we played Dungeon Crawl Classics, I went through and renamed all the spells for him. Easy thing to do. You just make a new name for the spell.
And I love having the different um, sort of material components. I know D&D lists material components. Most people, I don't know. There's something I don't quite like about how D&D does it, but having material components. So basically, your mage would have tons of pockets and have a bunch of weird components that just looking at there wouldn't be anything like a pinch of sand or a needle or this or that. But he needs it. It's sort of a foci.
Yeah. So one of the last games I ran for you, Seth, was a bit of a homebrew, and I was trying something out with homebrewed magic, and every spell had a component, had a material component, and I think it worked out really well. It had the effect I wanted. Your character was just loaded down with weird stuff, and he was always on the lookout for things. Like you had a spell that used a diseased eyeball as its component, and we were in a fight, and after the fight, Seth's character says, "I'm going to go up to the zombie and scoop his eye out." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense." And then he puts it in a jar, and the rest of the party goes, yeah, what are you doing? No, I need that.
I felt like Ghostbusters, but
yeah, Egon, your mucus.
exactly. How many sneezes you want to take a sample of?
So I thought that was fun. I like that. Now, that added a limiting factor. When you ran out of the component, you couldn't cast the spell anymore because most of the spells consume the components. There were some that didn't, but
that also brings it way back to the beginning of our conversation. What good is a mage without spells? Another thing is he would have a lot more knowledge about monsters, about monster parts, about, oh, that's a yellow blah, 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 because I've used it in all these different things.
Yeah, no, that's true. So did you find that limiting? What did you think about that? That limit, because there were spells that you couldn't cast. I mean, you knew the spell, but you couldn't find a piece of jade to cast the spell. So.
Right. It's a different form of limiting factor. I mean, in D&D, your limiting factor is how many spells you can cast a day, because most people don't use the material components. And in yours, it just changed the limiting factor. Instead of how many you cast per day, it's how many. And some computer games do the limiting factor by having spell points or energy or whatever you want to call it. It's a limiting factor. Now, in Dungeon Crawl Classics, the only limiting factor is whether or not you're still recognizable as a human.
Yeah, eventually you're going to blow yourself up.
You can cast a spell as many times a day, well, unless you fail and lose a spell for the day.
Right,
but you can cast as many times as you want to, but there's always that chaos creeping up on you.
Sure.
Which I always found that is fun. So the limiting factor is me.
So we've talked about all sorts of different aspects of magic. So let's just kind of look at some of the magic systems and talk about which ones you like. So of course, the first one is got to be D&D, right? So Vancian magic. You memorize the spell, you cast the spell, and then you forget it, and you've got to memorize it again, straight out of the novels of Jack Vance. And the spell's pretty much automatic. If you've memorized the spell and you meet the conditions to cast the spell, you cast the spell, it has an effect, and that's it. Maybe the other party gets a saving throw or something, but usually when you cast a spell, it works. None of your spells ever fail unless there's some sort of outside influence. And then, of course, there's Dungeon Crawl Classics, which we've talked about at great length, where you actually have to make a roll, and you have this, every single spell has this really wide range. Your magic missile could be, a 1-point dart, or it could be, a nuclear warhead, depending on how well you roll. And then there are other games. There's games that have like linear progressions of your spells, like World of Darkness, right? Where you have a certain thing that your person can do, whether it's called a spell or vampire power or whatever. And you can get better and better and better at it by putting experience points in it. And then there are games that use spell points. And that's actually crept back into D&D, even though
well, Psionics had it. They had what they called the power points.
Sure. Yeah. Gary tried really hard. Gary and Gygax, rejected spell points and tried to keep it out, and it kept sneaking in other ways. And then, of course, there's hundreds of other games and different ways that they handle magic. So, Manny, how do you like it? Of those systems, what do you prefer?
Oh, DCC hands down.
Yeah,
because I like chaos.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm one of the few game masters that I don't mind if a spell goes haywire and wrecks the whole adventure. I just think that's funny.
Sure. Pear-shaped, the role-playing game.
Hey, why did that elf make a bunch of noises and then cut his wrist? I don't know, some elf thing.
Yeah. yeah, that happened at a convention, right? It's Seth's character. He's an elf, and the first thing he did, first encounter of the game, he runs up and says a bunch of stuff and slits his wrist and gets a terrible roll and collapses. And the rest of the party's going, "What the hell was that?"
was that DCC?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Another one I did, I got a misfire. So instead of a magic missile, it basically sucked 4 hit points from everybody else around me. And I'm like, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Another thing about DCC, sorry to jump in, is their mercurial magic tables. So I can have a spell of magic missile, and you can have a spell of magic missile. But they're basically different versions of magic missile. I learned it from this guy. You learned it from that person. And so when I cast it, I don't know, maybe my body turns transparent or rats start pouring out of my sleeves. And when you cast it, a random field of wheat just grows up around you or something like that. That adds a bit more chaotic to it.
Yeah, it is definitely
Chaos to it.
definitely chaotic. That is true. So what is your preference of those sort of systems? Storyteller or D&D, DCC, something else? Yeah,
Me?
you, Seth.
Oh,
Sorry,
I like-
yes.
I- sorry.
You can't tell I'm looking at you. You up there. Up there in the romper room.
Yes, yeah. Like Manuel, I do like DCC. I do like the traditional spell Dungeons Dragons. I'll give a shout out to the old computer Ultima games where they had like 8 different circles, and a lot of thought went into writing the book of magic that came with the game, an actual physical book. That actually say, like, in order to cast a spell, you had to take this black pearl and bury it in a swamp under moon. It's not in the game because this was in the late 80s, so where the graphics were horrible, so you didn't actually have to do any of this stuff. But all the thought was into like how you craft a spell. You'd have to bury this in a swamp, and then it'd be glowing when you bring it out, and then you have to put this in something else, and then you throw it at somebody, and then the spell goes off, type thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
I do want to say that I know I've been ragging on D&D hard about the magic user stuff and the spells, but I have to say that Dragonlance, how they do magic users in that system, I do like a lot because there's a very strong story telling element to it. I mean, you have 3 schools of wizards, each one different by alignment, and I just love the story behind that, how that was put together. Um, if a system does something cool, I'll be into it. But if it's just a plain magic user, no, I'm not interested in playing one for D&D at least.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, okay, I love Dungeon Crawl Classics, but I gotta say that sometimes it feels like they just overdid the magic users. Right, the magic users. Every spell has a page of effects, and then you have the mercurial magic on top of that. Then you have the miscasting, and it's just so much. And then you can have patrons on top of everything else. You can have a supernatural patron.
Which seems more of a cleric thing to me.
Right. I mean, compare that to the poor fighter who gets a page and the mighty deed, which is really awesome, but it can just seem a little bit overwhelming. And sometimes, with all those random charts and things, it can start to seem, a little too random, a little too crazy. Like, for instance, you mentioned the mercurial magic could be rats pouring out of your sleeve, and the spell could be magic missile. Well, what the heck does that have to do with anything? I mean, how do rats pouring out of your sleeve even thematically connect with magic missile? I mean,
the whole chaos bit, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. But sometimes that sort of chaos and randomness can just kind of spill into nonsense. Just kind of silly nonsense, right? So I think all of these games do best with a flexible GM who's willing to interpret these things, to kind of work them together, to take the rules and bend them. Okay, so you're casting Magic Missile, and your mercurial magic is rats pouring out of your sleeve. I'm thinking, what the heck does that do with anything? Okay, fine. You know what? Your magic missiles are rats.
You're firing rats
You
at people.
cast the spell, and these magical rats shoot out of your sleeve, and they just gnaw people. I mean, okay, that's kind of silly, and I don't know, but at least I've worked them in. It's not just it's not just rats pouring out of you for no reason.
This big rat appears and fires lasers out of its eyes.
Yeah, it's something like that. So yeah, I can like I like DCC, but sometimes I like the more codified Dungeons and Dragons, particularly the early editions. I really like the early editions. Again, it works best, I think, with a flexible dungeon master, who allows you to do other things than casting the spells, and also lets you change the spells. You can say, hey, can I cast this spell like this? Sure. If they want to bend it a lot, you can say, all right, make an intelligence check to make that work. But Manny, yes, everybody, they have the same level of spells, but you can make new spells and change the spells around. I like that. And I think we've gotten used to Vancian magic, and so it seems kind of the baseline and kind of predictable and kind of vanilla and all that. And we forget that when Jack Vance wrote it in Dying Earth, it was new, it was different, it was wild. You memorized something like a formula, some magic words and some gestures and some other things like that. And then when you cast them, they left your mind and disappeared. That's actually really weird. I mean, imagine if math did that, right? I've memorized the formula and I used the formula to calculate something. Now, for the life of me, I can't remember the formula, and then I have to go study it again. I think sometimes we forget how magical and weird that is.
One of the things I like about some of these systems where magic is dangerous, where there's a cost to magic, like DCC, there's a chance of being corrupted. In D&D, there's no real, well, the cost for being a magic user is you can't really do anything else. But there doesn't seem to be a danger in magic. Oh, I'm going to break the laws of physics to cast Magic Missile. And okay, just do it. There's no danger. There's no price to pay.
Well, yeah, that's a matter of opinion. I mean, that's just whether you like that or not. There's not. I mean, magic doesn't exist. Okay, I'm just going to come out and say it. Magic doesn't exist, so we can't objectively say whether it's dangerous or not. Because it's
I know. Yeah.
So it depends on whether you like it to be dangerous or not. And there's no reason why it should be. Swinging a sword isn't dangerous. I mean, not if you do it properly. Or none of the other classes have their abilities be inherently dangerous to themselves. So
none of the other classes are breaking the laws of physics.
Well, no, okay, yeah, but I mean that.
Except the monk. The monk tends to.
Okay, true. The monk is a mess. Yeah. But I mean, you say breaking the laws of physics again. That's an interpretation of something that doesn't exist. Maybe magic is the law of physics. Maybe that's actually how magic works.
Other laws, yeah.
Right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's getting in touch with the true nature of reality. It's not necessary. It's not breaking the laws of physics. It's understanding them better. It's knowing the loopholes or something. There's all sorts of different sources. So there's no reason why it has to be dangerous.
No.
I mean,
Okay, yeah.
if you like it dangerous, great. If you don't want it to be dangerous, then it's not dangerous. I should, since we were talking about other games, I should just make a shout out. I just want to say that if you really like Magic, if you're really into Magic, then you should dig out Mage the Ascension and get ready to sit around a table and philosophize.
Yeah. To me, that's a little too open-ended.
The game is about magic and how it works, and it is just gonzo amazing. One of these days, I'll subject you all to 3 hours of me rambling about Mage the Ascension. But
Yeah.
but so any final thoughts about Magic, Manny?
I hope one day to find a good magic system that emulates what I see a lot in TV and movies better, like especially wizard battles. You don't see that done out, especially in D&D. Like the most you could do is maybe counterspell something, but like if you watch, I think it was Sword in the Stone.
Yeah.
That
Madam Mim.
yes, that battle they had
Yep.
that was amazing.
And the
you-
beginning of the movie Wizards.
Yes, I do love wizard battles. That's absolutely true.
Except how they did it in the Lord of the Rings movie. That was breakdancing.
Oh, and as long as they were complaining, the Harry Potter movies, right?
Oh,
Like they had a whole bunch of wizards, and I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. Everybody just cast the same spell, whatever, blah blah blah, and it was just beams of energy coming out of their wands. Literally, they could have just been firing blasters at each other.
Yeah. Oh, we don't use guns. Well,
you
no,
you
you're still
shoot people
using
with your
yeah.
wands. That's a gun.
Yeah.
So yes, Magic Duels would be great. Now, I should say that DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics, actually has Wizard Duels, but again, I think they just over-egged the pudding. They are the rules are pretty complicated, and you just fall further into that magic weirdness rabbit hole.
Well,
all the rest of the party is going, okay, is it my turn yet?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think DCC should just be a game about wizards.
Yes, it should.
Everybody should play a wizard.
It's either everybody's a magic user or nobody's a magic user.
Because I mean, really.
Yeah.
So Magic Duels, yeah, I understand that. Actually, to tell you the truth, a bit of history, there were rules in second edition D&D about Magic Duels and using spells to counter other spells, and they actually had a list of what spells countered which spells. So if someone I can't actually remember them. But if someone cast, and they weren't all just dispel magic. They literally had spells that cancel each other. Like if somebody cast fireball and somebody else cast, I don't know, water weird or something that's not a spell. But I mean, the spells would cancel each other out. Neither spell would have their full effect. They would cancel each other out. And they had a proficiency in recognize it spellcraft.
Oh yes,
right?
Yes,
so,
I do remember that now.
So the evil sorcerer could start casting a spell. You could roll against your proficiency and recognize the spell that he's casting, and then you could cast a counter spell. Again, it was kind of complicated and didn't really come up that often. You're right. I haven't really seen a really good system for Magic Duels like that. Except, two guys standing there casting spells at each other. That's a Magic Duel.
Yeah. Well, D&D is coming out with a book called Strixhaven, a college for mages, and which is pretty much Harry Potter. But
the big thing is going to a magical prom. Ooh.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that but I'm hoping that there'll be rules about that. At least I'm hoping there continue discussion about how to make Magic more impressive.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but we'll see. Hoping. We'll see. Yeah.
So Seth, what are your final thoughts?
And also, going back to the Wizard Duels, some of the duels, like the Madam Mim one and the one in Wizards, you could almost see those duels between two rival druids shapeshifting, because that's what they did. They shapeshifted in different things. You could just see two druids just changing into different animals and stuff.
I think the best way to have a magic duel is to have two magic users just casting spells at each other. One guy casts web and the other guy casts, the other guy casts strength or polymorph or whatever. Because countering somebody's spell is pretty anticlimactic.
Yeah, you could do a quote unquote counter
Magic the Gathering, and I don't think I'd like it at a table either.
I would advise dungeon masters and game masters to make it as dramatic as possible. So at least, because if you play things too technical, it gets boring. But if you could just add flavor, describe it as best you can, I think that might help.
I could also see a civilized duel between wizards where they're not actually trying to kill each other. They're like, they're trying to one up each other about, hey, look what my spell did, or maybe each of them have like a golem, a champion or something, an avatar or something.
Oh, I like that.
And you are trying to cast an offensive spell against that thing, against their champion, and they're trying to either cast a beneficial spell to block your spell or trying to cast against your champion, stuff like that.
I like that. I like that a lot. Actually, you could play a game of Magic the Gathering, right? Magic the Gathering it's supposed to be two wizards standing on a hill summoning monsters to beat each other up.
It's supposed to be that, but then they put all this story in there.
Yeah, exactly. I think that gets lost a lot at the table, but it's the way it was originally intended was two magic users casting spells to do this, and you can even cast spells like straight at the other magic user. So you could easily do that at the table and in a role-playing setting. Your two magic users could play a game of Magic the Gathering using their actual spells. Yep. It could be a lot of fun.
And I think it would be, and instead of just directly trying to kill the other person, I think it'd be, as I was saying, sort of a more civilized. You could see like mages in two different towers. There's high-level mages having it's like a chess match, every month where they contact each other. But basically they use their spells.
I read a book once called The Night Circus. I don't remember the author right now. It was a beautiful book, wonderfully well written. I really recommend it. And without giving too much away, there were these two wizards, and they were always they had this kind of internal contest, but they weren't trying to kill each other. They were trying to outdo each other. They were trying to create the most impressive piece of magic. And I think that would be fantastic. I mean, what if you had I don't know, like a magical Olympics or something, and you were trying to do the most impressive piece of magic to impress your rival or a third party who is going to be the judge. You could really open it up. There's so much more that you can do with magic than making the other guy explode.
In the old Heroes Quest or Quest for Glory games by Sierra Online, there was it was tongue-in-cheek. They had this thing called the Wizards Institute of Technology, or WIT. And initiation thing, it was basically an obstacle course that you got through by casting different spells. You come to a huge wall of ice, well, cast a flame spell. You have to use a levitation at other times, and you have to think on your feet to use different spells. There was also something in one of the old Bard's Tale games, Bard's Tale 3, where you had a poem, and the poem would reference certain spells. They wouldn't come out and say it, but it was sort of like your Mandala map that you had in the other. Yeah. But you had to say, okay, this refers to this type of spell, and it was basically a magical combination lock to get through this shimmering wall. You had to cast these certain spells in this order to match the poem.
Cool.
So that sort of, you use the spells in a different way rather than just killing somebody.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, a really good example. I don't like the way it was actually implemented, but the Tri-Wizard tournament from Harry Potter was a great example of obstacles solved by magic, but you can use different magic to do the different things. That actually is fantastic. I love that idea. As a side note, what I didn't like about it, it was supposed to be a spectator sport, but nobody could see what was going on.
Yeah, because they were always in different locations.
That was dumb. But the idea, the idea, the obstacles that the students overcame through magic, but they did through different types of magic. That was great. That was great. So,
I think, like you were saying, when back your other games of D&D, where you gave out the spells and they had to think sort of outside the box. How can I use this spell for this situation? Whereas just somebody looking at it say, oh, you can't use a spell to do this, but you have to kind of think and think more clever.
You need two things. You need an imaginative player, and you need a flexible dungeon master who will allow you to not break the rules, but maybe bend them and use a new rule in a different way. And that's one of the I don't know so much about 5th edition, but I know in 4th edition and 3rd edition, one of the things that bothered me was that there were so many combat spells and not enough utility spells. And I'm a big fan of the utility spells, like mud to earth and and things like that. Things that don't have an immediate, you'd think, oh, that's dumb. What's that going to do? Well, you're fighting a golem, right? None of your combat spells work because he's resistant to the magic. So you think, oh, the magic user can't do anything. The magic user can do lots of things. He just can't affect the golem directly, right? You cast a spell and create a hole underneath him and he falls in, you just have to be clever with the spells. So I like spells that are open-ended that allow you to use them in different ways.
And that's also a very hard choice. Which spells do you pick? Because even at the really high levels, you only get 6 spells a level, or you can only know 6 different spells in a level. So.
Yeah. That was always a wonderfully hard decision for the magic user, memorizing his spells at the start.
And in 1st edition D&D, 1st level had 30 spells, but you could only ever know like 4 until you're like 6th level or something.
Well, yeah, that's part of the trick. Yeah.
Well, that's why you hoped you'd find spell scrolls.
Yeah.
The one-shot things, but that's why.
Scrolls are great, and in early D&D, definitely they were really bloody important.
Yes, that's why whenever you DM, you were looking at a module, a lot of your NPCs, clerics, druids, any type of magic user, that would say the spells they had, but they always had 1 or 2 scrolls on them.
Right.
It was few and far between you'd actually see an NPC magic user or divine spellcaster with no spell scrolls.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
And actually, there were rules in 3rd edition you could actually make scrolls. Like before the adventure, you'd say, okay, I'm going to spend this. And well, in 3rd edition, you had to spend experience points and gold to do it. I don't know what the rules were in 1st and 2nd edition to make spell scrolls.
I think there were some ways of making scrolls in 2nd edition. I would be surprised if there weren't. Yeah, they were. They were expensive to make, but you can make them.
So a lot of wizards would say, okay, I'm making these scrolls and then taking them with me on the adventure, just in case.
No, that's clever. That's good. But I just wanted to say, we're back to talking about D&D specific things. The read magic spell. I just could never get my head around that. It just seemed impossible, impossibly cruel to make the magic user take and memorize a spell so that he could read other spells, especially at first level, right? So the way it's actually written is that you can't just pick up a spell and read it. You have to cast read magic to read the spell. So if I'm a first level magic user and I want to use scrolls, then my one spell has to be read magic. So now I can't do any magic unless I happen to find the scroll. And then I can only use one scroll because I've cast my spell to cast the spell. I could never bring myself to make anybody do that. And I've always called read magic a class skill. You're a wizard. You can read magic.
If you couldn't, you wouldn't be a wizard.
Exactly. Just like, you know, a thief has all those power, all those abilities, and you know, even though he has to roll for them, sure, but a fighter gets to automatically sharpen his sword. You know, he doesn't have to spend any, you know, precious spell slots or anything saying, oh, I'm gonna take sharpened sword as a skill. So please just let you. Actually, I don't even know if it's a thing in 5th edition anymore, but if you play
they took that out.
If you play old D&D,
Thankfully.
just let your wizards read magic.
Another thing in 5th edition and also in Pathfinder, I think, they really played up cantrips. In 2nd edition, I think was the first time they had cantrips, but cantrips were like other spells. You had spell slots. You can only cast once. But in 5th edition and in Pathfinder, cantrips, you can cast as many times as you want to.
Also,
and they get also cantrips can get better the higher level you are. Like if you're a 5th level caster and you cast the cantrip, it's better than if you're just 1st level casting the cantrip.
the biggest difference I saw, of course, was that cantrips in 2nd edition were party tricks.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of getting better at them is kind of laughable because they were light candle. Oh, I'm better at it. Now I can light 5 candles.
Like in Hackmaster really went overboard with their description.
The wet willy.
The wet willy cantrip, yeah.
But see,
but they never did damage.
Oh yeah, see,
or maybe 1 die 3. Right?
No, they never. Cantrips never did. That was part of the definition. The cantrip can never do any damage, and so like Eldritch Blast or whatever just breaks my brain. Like, what? You can cast a cantrip and it does damage, and you can just cast it for free all day. All right. I mean, it seems like at that point you're just done with Vancian magic. You can just throw it away. You're playing a different game now. That is our rambling talk about magic.
Yes.
If you have any comments, put them below. Start your magic duel down below in the comments. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.